And the band Hillsong does so well that they renamed the church after the band.
Yeah.
Which is a red flag. In my mind, if you're naming a church after your worship band, you've got a problem with focus at the very least.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Hymnpartial, the podcast where we talk all things church music. I'm Cara Devereaux.
And I'm Monet Funke. And today we are responding to the documentary Hillsong, a Mega Church Exposed. We watched it, so now you don't have to.
But first, if you haven't already, go to hymnpartial.com, sign up for our free weekly newsletter. This allows us to keep in touch with you when the pesky algorithms of social media decide to up and change. Plus, the weekly newsletter contains all sorts of fun bonus content, including exclusive videos that our subscribers get to see first. In this week's bonus clip, we're going to share our Hillsong tunes that have stuck with us over the years. But if you're not a subscriber, you have to wait to find out what we're going to say. So don't miss out on next week's bonus clip. Go to hymnpartial.com, sign up for our free weekly newsletter today.
Now, this week's episode is going to be a little bit different than we normally do. We're actually doing like a weird, we're kind of like 10 years behind the trend. We're having like a response video, though we're not going to be playing the video and like pausing it or anything like that. But we are going to be responding to this documentary that just came out a few weeks ago on Hillsong. And we'll be getting into why we're responding to it in a little bit. But just for those of you who don't know, I figured I'd just give some stats on like what this is. Because if you're never hearing of this, this basically came out last month, the end of the month in March 2022. Like I said, it's called Hillsong, a Mega Church Exposed. Here in the UK, you can watch it on Discovery Plus. I'm not sure what network it's on in the US.
In the UK, you can go on Amazon and go on Discovery Plus. You can get a 1 week free trial and watch it.
Which we're not suggesting.
We're
but
not
if
really,
you're wondering where,
don't waste your free trial.
Who produced it or who's distributed it? It's Discovery Plus. It's basically 3 episodes on the rise of the church we know as Hillsong, from its origins in Australia and how it became an international business, and how that all kind of came crashing down due to a series of scandals. Like we said, we watched it, so you don't have to. Yeah,
it's 3 episodes and they're all like an hour long and you're just watching it like, oh man, why am I watching this?
So in this episode, we're going to talk about what actually the documentary shares, what it reveals. We're going to talk about why we're talking about this, particularly because we're a church music podcast. But I'm sure you guys have assumed at least one of the main tie-ins if you know anything about Hillsong. And just kind of give some responses to the documentary, what we think about it, not so much analysis. And we do plan, this is another kind of 2-parter, we do plan next week to dig into some of the main issues with what is revealed in the documentary in regards to church music, specifically because that's our shtick. And if you're a subscriber, you'll have first access to our bonus question where we talk about what is our favorite Hillsong song, which I'm putting favorite in air quotes for those of you who are listening, because as you'll tell after the discussion, it's maybe not the best term to use.
Don't bite our heads off until you've watched the whole episode and see what we've got to say first.
So Cara is better than me. She actually watched all 3 of the episodes.
Somehow that makes me feel worse than you. I was like, I actually sat there for 3 hours and watched this. Oh my goodness.
Well, I mean, I think I could have watched. I just ran out of time, to be fair. But
I'm running out of willpower.
Yeah, the first episode is really what pertains most to us. It really just talks about kind of the history of the church, the history of like the founder of Hillsong, and the history behind their music company, record industry, record company, and the music that they put out. And the second and third episodes have more to do with scandals around Hillsong's leaders.
Yep.
So I don't know which one of us should take this. I kind of have like a bunch of notes on what the first episode is talking about, but maybe, Kara, you could kind of walk us through the episodes and I'll just chime in with some extra notes.
Yeah, I have a lot more to say about the first episode because it's probably the most relevant to the sort of thing we talk about. So in the first episode, they kind of outline where the church came from. I think you had more notes on this than me. I think, was it an Assemblies of God?
Yes. So it was started in Australia in 1978 by Frank Houston. Frank Houston is the dad of Brian Houston, who we know now as like the former, but the main guy of Hillsong. And basically, this was kind of like a local smallish church, maybe like 200 people.
Yeah.
And they had like a breakaway church, like a church plant that was called Hill Christian Life Center. And that was where Frank Houston brought in his son, Brian Houston, to kind of run that church. And as I understand it, Brian was basically trying to grow the church in a number of ways.
Yeah.
I don't want to take away from where you're going with this.
No, I was going to say, yeah, that's what he was doing.
Yeah. He was trying to grow the church. He was heavily influenced by some of the movements going on in the U.S. And basically the charismatic Pentecostal movement within the U.S., which kind of started in my neck of the woods in California. we give you all the good and the bad things. Controversial. And in Kansas as well. So that's kind of like the origins. Like it started in Australia with Frank Houston, church planted out to Hill Christian Life Center with Brian Houston, and Brian Houston, kind of picking up from his dad, really wanted to expand this work, not just like a little tiny church, but to actually like grow it and make it something to be reckoned with.
So this church has a brand. Actually, before we go any further, I think it's worth saying that the founders of Hillsong are branding and marketing geniuses. In a worldly, secular sense.
Yeah.
They're very, very savvy. So you've got this church. They have a band called Hillsong. And Hillsong does music really well. Like they produce high quality music. Even back at the beginning, high quality contemporary music, which is attracting lots of people. So then they bring in a girl called, how'd you say her name? Darlene... Is it Czech? Or is that...
I'm totally blanking now.
Yeah, if you're familiar with early 2000s contemporary Christian music, I think it's Darlene Czech, but it's spelt...
Yes, it's like, I'd literally just put Czech, but I don't think that's right. But yes, she was a former child star in Australia.
Yeah. So she comes in, of course... She's been a child star. She's got a good grasp of the culture, secular culture, and the music from that and the music industry. And she's also a child star, which makes her famous, which is great for the brand. So she comes in, they're producing great music. They have the savvy to go international with that music, to bring out albums. And the band Hillsong does so well that they rename the church after the band. Yeah. Which is a red flag. In my mind, if you're naming a church after your worship band, you've got a problem with focus at the very least.
Yes.
And so from there, it picks up. They don't just take the music worldwide, they start planting churches. It's hard to use that language.
They start expanding their operation.
They start expanding. And here's the thing, like if you've sung any modern worship music in the last 10 to 20 years, if you've been in a church that does that a lot, chances are you've sung a Hillsong song whether you know it or not. Yeah. We were surprised by some of the songs we'd sung, especially in the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
Just didn't know that that's what they were. So that's kind of the rise of Hillsong. I had a few other notes about kind of how they work, but on the whole, that's kind of what the first episode covers is how they rose to prominence, who they are, where they came from, and who the big players are.
Yeah, I mean, I think they really emphasize to, like Cara was saying, the documentary emphasized the branding and the product that was Hillsong. They kind of, for those in the States, you might know of and you might know this too, the venue in New York called Madison Square Garden. Now, this is like where basketball teams play. This is where like humongous pop stars have concerts. I remember, get ready to judge me, one of my favorite concerts from HBO was the NSYNC live at Madison Square Garden. In fact, to get to Madison Square Garden is like a career defining moment for many people.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a huge deal because it's thousands and thousands of seats, and they don't just let any old body there. Well, Hillsong performed there multiple times. And you just think of like what that means, like from a church perspective, like, okay, like there's plenty of big concerts, big church concerts, but this was kind of emphasized in the documentary that they had kind of arrived in all the ways that a major pop star would have arrived. So they obviously took this operation from Australia and went international with it. And the documentary kind of points out that it was Brian Houston's desire to like crack the market open in the United States, because that would be like such a big get, not just to be big internationally, like in other parts of like, Europe or Southeast Asia or whatever, but to actually be like in America, that was like a particular goal.
Yeah. There's a financial aspect to that as well, because America's where the mega bucks are. Yeah. If you want to be cynical, which is hard not to be.
It's hard not to be.
But the whole spreading throughout the world thing is also a theological thing. But we'll talk about that next week as we talk about, some of the other stuff behind this. One of the things that struck me about, I can't remember if it was the first episode or not, where they spoke to the security guard and he was talking about it being like a nightclub. Yeah. That kind of like set up.
Yeah. So they also, so just to back up a little bit, so they talk about the origins of the church, they talk about the branding and Brian Houston's desires, but they also talk about the rise of the church in the U.S. and how that happened. And that happened through the music, but also the installation of their big preacher in New York called Carl Lenz.
Yes, who's the focus of episode 2.
Yeah. I mean, kind of like the last half of episode 1. Yeah, and then all of episode 2 and the scandal surrounding him. So New York was kind of like
it was the place.
That was the place. Of course, there were Hillsong churches all like around the U.S., but that was like the epicenter because of this pastor, Carl Lenz. And just FYI, like I didn't know any of these people's names before this documentary. I didn't know anything about the scandals surrounding them. I really I'm not saying this like I'm better or anything. I just completely don't keep up with this sort of thing. Yeah. So if I'm tripping up over the facts, it's because it is very foreign to me. Maybe you guys know a lot more about this.
So I was familiar with who Brian Houston was because I had a friend who was part of Hillsong in Australia. But Carl Lenz and stuff, a lot of it was just kind of foreign to me as well, because I knew Hillsong and I kind of vaguely knew they were a mega church, not great theology, but I didn't know much more about that. So it was quite eye-opening to watch this documentary, not in a good way.
Yeah. And just a few more things. I'm not sure if you had more to talk about, but just a few more facts about what the documentary talks about in that first episode, which I thought were really pivotal. So they basically were speaking, like I said, this first episode's more about us in terms of the Hymnpartial world, but they spoke a lot about how they how they pushed a product.
Yeah.
And a few key things that they mentioned was that they basically tested Hillsong music.
Yes, I was going to bring that up as well.
They tested the Hillsong music out on the congregations every week before they'd put it on a record. And like, you might think like, well, of course they played it in the congregations first before it was recorded, but it wasn't thought of that way. At least that's what the documentary
it was
projects.
Product testing.
Yes, it was product testing. And one guy said that he had a bit of alliteration as to how they influenced the world through Hillsong. It was the 6 C's. And he was saying the first C is church. So that's the first way, by growing the church with people, concerts, which we just talked about, Madison Square Garden, CDs, which he said, just for alliteration purposes, most people don't use CDs anymore, but essentially the records that they put out. Their college, which again, that was new to me. I didn't know Hillsong had a college, a Bible college. Cinema, I guess they were making films.
Yeah, they did make a documentary or some sort of stuff. And their promotional videos, very, very well made.
Yeah. And then lastly, their conferences.
Yeah.
So this was the way that they were how all of a sudden it was Hillsong everywhere. It's because of this very intentional influence through those mediums.
Yeah.
And that's, again, that marketing genius, because they weren't just coming at it from the music angle. They weren't just coming at it from the church angle. They were no, church, concert, CDs, college, cinema, everything,
And the other part of that is that in marketing, you have what's called a sales funnel, which is basically directing people into buying more products and stuff. It's more complex than that, but that's the basics of it. So you've got, that looks like a really fun concert. I'll go to that, which means that you want your hoodie and your merch and your CDs. And then you think, there's a church. I'll go to that. And that funnels you into things like, they've got self-help courses and they've got all these other things, and I should go to their conference and I should buy the conference brochure and the books that they're selling at the conference. And so you get this kind of marketing thing going on. And
a lot of the folks on the documentary had a lot of critical things to say about this. One of the guys who was on the documentary, a Christian, one of the few, was saying how it bothered him, their approach, because they're not supposed to be making consumers. They're supposed to be making disciples. And also of their music, that it was another lady on there, and maybe you're going to get into that. I keep trying not to step on Cara because she's got a lot of notes, and so do I. But there was a lady on there talking specifically about the music and how it was created to stay relevant and to sound like what the world was sounding like. So, for example, in the 2000s, she was saying, and this is almost what she said verbatim, in the 2000s, it sounded like pop music, and now it sounds like Coldplay, because those are the more largely appealing ways. And so I think it was her, but she said something to the effect of that their music was easy to get into.
Yeah.
It wasn't serious like hymns.
But the other thing that she said that really, really struck me is, quote, they weaponized their music.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Loaded statement.
Yeah, that's a lot of unpacking that we're not going to do today. But yeah, the other thing that struck me was that there was a common theme among the people that they spoke to, was that they came in and they were wowed by the experience.
Yeah.
And that's what drew them in. But one of the girls talked about it as it's just really good music followed by the equivalent of a TED Talk. And that's the phrase she used. She's like, it's like an inspirational TED Talk. And it does. It makes it seem like Christianity is cool and fun and easy. And frankly, my concern with that is that in a place like that, no one gets to know you. You never have to change if you don't want to. And you never have to be challenged about your sin. You just come in, you consume the goods, you buy the merch, you feel like you've got Christianity. But it's not good.
Yeah, it's not great. So why are we talking about this? You probably have already...
Did you want a quick rundown of episode 2 and 3?
Very quick. So
I could do it super brief.
Yeah, 2 and 3 are about the scandals. And the reason why we're not going to dwell on it too long, Car's just going to give a brief update on it, is because it's sad, but also it's not our wheelhouse.
It's also, you got to remember, this is not, I don't think it's produced by Christians. We couldn't work it out. But it feels, when you're watching it, you're kind of like, this feels like gossip. I don't like it. Yeah. And also it's a lot of stuff you don't actually need to know. Yeah. But the overview is that episode 2 follows the main pastor of the New York branch church thing, yeah, called Carl Lentz, and it talks about his rise to fame, how Brian Houston potentially felt threatened by him, and how he had an affair with someone which led to him being removed from the church. Mm-hmm. There's more to it than that. It's very interesting from a branding and marketing perspective. It talks a lot about his friendship with Justin Bieber and what was actually going on there, which was really interesting.
The push of celebrity culture and how that added to the brand. But it was
just like, there was this mutual benefit as well. So Justin Bieber had this bad boy image and everybody was getting sick of it. So he had this religious revival, which is great for Hillsong because they get Justin Bieber coming to their church, and it's great for Justin Bieber because his sales go back up again.
Which to be fair, for the record, I don't think that was a fair thing to say, which makes me question who's made it.
Yeah, I think there was an element of truth in that. It was convenient, but I don't think that was like the entire story.
And I don't think it's fair to say, okay, well, Justin Bieber was a false convert because it was opportunistic for him to be one, because he still is professing Christianity.
I'm not sure. I don't follow Justin Bieber.
I do. He's still very openly and boldly professing Christianity. We maybe wouldn't take the same flavor of how we practice that, but I didn't think it was necessarily fair. It was kind of like oh, Justin Bieber, yeah, right. Like that's
what makes me think this wasn't created by Christians. Was
maybe. There's
had
plenty
a
of Christians
slightly,
that probably feel that way.
Yeah, it had a slightly scathing tone that I thought. So that was episode 2. If you do watch it, actually, Carl Lentz is psychologically a very fascinating person, but really awful. Yeah. But if you do watch it, just a brief content warning. There's a girl in it who was assaulted by one of the guys who's in leadership in Hillsong, and she does describe what happened. It's not super graphic, but it's just like, we didn't need to know that. And then episode 3 turns its attention to Brian Houston himself and his father, Frank Houston. And definite content warning, you're going to want to skip chunks of that. They do warn you ahead of time. There were bits I was just like, nope, we're going past that. Yeah. But basically, at the time that the documentary was made, Brian Houston had been accused of helping to cover up historic child abuse by his father. That trial recently finished at the time that we're recording this, and further charges against Brian Houston have come to light, but that's... Go find out for yourself if you actually are interested. You don't need to know. Like, it doesn't matter. Let the law deal with it. It doesn't matter to us. Well, it matters.
It matters. Strong. Yeah, it matters.
You don't need to know
our business.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. It's none of our business. Let the law deal with it and let justice be done. It is a deeply upsetting episode in many ways, but it's very insightful into how the leadership of Hillsong works and the kind of, we protect the brand at all costs. Yeah. And no one is beyond being thrown under the bus if it protects the brand. Yeah. So that's basically a summary of the 3 episodes. I don't really recommend watching it, to be honest.
So I know I keep trying to pull this along, but I think it's important. Why are we talking about this? It's not just for clicks, but thank you if you're here new. It is because we speak a lot about old hymns. We talk about different genres of music on this show. We do talk about contemporary music. We've even had modern day hymn writers on the show. So I think there is kind of divide, especially when you get into more Calvinistic, Reformed traditions in Christianity. There is kind of this divide of like, we only sing the old stuff or we only sing the new stuff, or if we do sing a combination, we are heavily leaning on one of those sides of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of us in the 2000s grew up in churches that were solid Bible churches that preached faithfully the word of God every week. And we sang Hillsong songs. And so the majority of us who did that maybe might be feeling certain kinds of ways about how do we move forward.
Yeah.
And it might seem unfair, but we will talk about this more heavily next week because we want to kind of get deeper into like the philosophy and the methodology behind a lot of the Hillsong songs that were written and kind of and addressing it from that
and not
that
just
angle.
them, but other churches like them.
Yeah.
We're talking about Hillsong because that was the documentary.
Yeah.
But it is a broader
issue.
Yeah.
So that's why we're talking about it on here. It's almost like also how could we not talk about it, you know, while we usually have to dig out dusty books to give you guys the history and the background behind the hymns we talk about on this show. That is not, we don't live in a bubble of like 200 years ago. Like we live right now in 2022 and this has happened and is being talked about. So I do think we should just kind of address it for those who are like me and you're like, whoa, what? All this happened with Hillsong? To me, I didn't even really know that Hillsong was a church. I kind of had an idea like, oh yeah, there's some churches that are associated with Hillsong. I didn't actually get swept into their global like phenomenon. I just sang some of the songs that they had created at church. And I didn't like own a Hillsong CD. Not that that makes me good or bad. I didn't follow them like that. So to me, the documentary was really shocking. And maybe some of you, our listeners, like watched it too, or you're hearing the kind of responses to it and you're like, wait, how do I process this?
If I didn't have friends that had either been in Hillsong or churches like it and come out of them, then it would have been very much a shock for me watching those documentaries.
Okay.
But like, I don't know, because I thought maybe it's just them, maybe this is a one-off. And then watching that documentary, I was like, okay, this is how the whole thing works.
Yeah.
That's horrifying.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on why we're talking about it?
Yeah, just like you say, we talk all things church music, and Hillsong has such a wide reach that it is something that we need to address. But also, you know, we're not against contemporary music, we're for discernment.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's not clear. People say to you, you mustn't sing that. It's sinful or it's carnal or it's worldly or it's whatever. But it's not always clear immediately why that would be the case. So that's partly why, especially next week, we wanted to talk about it a bit more, about what the actual arguments are. It's not just about modern versus old. There's more to it.
Absolutely. 100%. And this is not just us teasing in like on and on about next week's episode. It's just if we put it in one episode, it'd be 2 hours.
It's too much.
So we're not going to do that to you. So just some initial responses after watching 2/3 of the series and the whole series. I think Cara kind of said it. It was just a bit icky.
It was very icky.
It was a bit icky to watch because I think, and this is someone who watched 2/3 of this documentary, listened to most of the rise and fall of Mars Hill
that was icky as well.
documentary. Yeah. And even though I think that one was more useful in a lot of ways, it still is a bit icky. And I don't want to sound like a hypocrite, but I know it's kind of difficult. But I think those kind of exposés speak to our desire to know gossip and to want to be part of, like, you know, spilling the tea. And I did feel like it was just a bit icky because it's good to expose. It's good to expose things that are sinful. It's good to expose things that have been mishandled and try to learn from it and understand it. And I think maybe the first half of the 3 series was trying to do that, but they got too excited about the juicy, gritty details of the scandals around these guys. And like, to me, having in my lifetime, because we live in this this generation of huge celebrity pastors. I've seen enough pastors fall because of scandal that I don't need to know all of the gritty details. It's like, oh, so-and-so's been, removed from office. And that's because they had sexual sin. Okay, that's literally all I need to know. That's terrible.
We also live in an era where you can monetize your victimhood.
Oh, yeah.
As well. Like, I'm not saying that's what they're doing, but like, there were aspects of it where you were kind of like, all I need to know is that he had an affair. Like, that's why he was removed from office. That's all I need to know. I'm not a member of Hillsong. I'm not interested in who and what and where and all the gory details. And I think that's where both more the Hillsong thing than the Mars Hill one, but both of them I think maybe shared too much that we didn't actually need to know.
Yeah, so I think that was like my initial reaction, just thinking like, this is really sad and it's really icky. I think it's not just sad from those things that we mentioned, but I think churches and Christians, which are what churches are made out of, churches are just Christians in one local place, just so you know. But it's more complex. I'm going to totally get DMs for this. But I think we should grieve when the name of Christ is dragged through the mud in the way that it has been in these. Now we're talking about both instances when scandals come out about arrogance and bullying and sexual sin and money laundering and or abuse. All of these things are shameful to the name of Christ.
Yeah.
And, this is why, and it's maybe not our wheelhouse, though I will say this episode's a little bit different than usual, but it is kind of an issue with mega churches that you don't have the accountability that you should, not for every mega church, but probably most of them. You don't have accountability.
A general trend.
People don't know you. You don't know them. You don't know your pastor. Your pastor doesn't know them. They actually said this in the documentary. One of the security guards, I think, was saying, I don't know what kind of church this is, but in my church, like, when I was growing up or whatever, if I needed to talk to the pastor, his office was open and I could go to the pastor and talk to him. But with Carl Lentz and all of these guys in Hillsong, it was like they were rock stars. They had VIP treatment. They'd cruise in right before the service and all of their bodyguards were around them. They go straight up on the stage and they do their thing and then they go straight back in the car and they drive off like as if it was a performance, like as if they were like, Britney Spears or something like that.
Yeah.
And I found that to be like, whether the documentary is made by Christians or not, and if you know, let us know in the comments. It kind of was a tell that like real Christianity, like their scandal and all of their stuff that they went through, is because real Christianity wasn't being practiced. There was no accountability between the pastor and the people he was shepherding, which, how can you shepherd people you don't know? Spoiler alert, you can't. And I think that would have been emphasized more if it was more about like, let's use this documentary to help the church.
Yeah.
Where it wasn't.
Yeah, it did feel like a secular documentary. I think for me, it's deeply grieving to see the trail of destruction that's left behind by these people. Because like, it's not a vague thing for me anyway. Like, I know people who have just walked away from the church and never come back because of these things. And it's also frustrating because you know that these people are famous enough and rich enough and have enough devoted followers that they're just going to bounce back. It's like there's no consequences for them, which is very frustrating. But
in a sense, there's no consequences.
Well, in a sense that like maybe they get fined or a slap on the wrist from the law for something they did, and in the end God is just, which is terrifying. But in this world it can be frustrating to watch them just bounce back and start again and do the same thing over. But yeah,
what do you think are the documentary's kind of strengths? or weaknesses?
I thought it was very well produced. And I liked that they talked to a range of different people. So they talked to people from Hillsong who were involved in different ways. They talked to people who were employed by it, people who went to the college, people from different regions, so that you could kind of get this feel that this is not like a single localized issue. It's you got a better feel for the church as a whole. Yeah, and I thought the way they structured it worked quite well.
Yeah, and I might be biased because I only watched 2/3, but I think the first episode is the best of the episodes.
Definitely, they get worse as you go through.
It just was more like, oh, I walked away informed about things that I didn't know. So I do think the first episode really paints the picture for you. They even dive into like the charismatic movement. They dive into some things that we'll be talking in more detail about next week. And I was impressed by that. Some of the people that they had, all of the people, well, not all, a good chunk of the people who they were interviewing throughout the documentary were folks that had been, that they knew what they were talking about. They weren't just like Bill and Joe off the street or whatever. They were like the reporter who first investigated the story and the issues with Carl Lentz. They had a woman who was studying like the music aspect, like the history of their music and stuff like that. So it wasn't just like, random people who had opinions. They were also like very informed. So I thought that was a strength. And they obviously, like you said, it was well produced. So they know how to play up the drama. There was like, camera, like, the editing and like all the music, boom.
Yeah.
Like, it was dramatic.
When the girl Carl Lentz had an affair with, they set that shot up so dramatically. Yes. She's like sitting in this empty church in a chair and all the lights like flooding in behind her. Yeah. And you're like, that is a beautiful shot. It's very dramatic, but also what are you doing?
Yeah, very dramatic. And, they told their story. They had a narrative and they told it. So I'm sure there's more to the story than what they shared. But I think they gave you enough facts to keep you watching and keep you engaged. I think the weaknesses are, again, whether made by Christians or not, like it was more of a gossip session and less of like, let's evaluate these things. So, the Christianity Today podcast for the rise and fall of Mars Hill, there's a lot of things that they expressed that I didn't agree with. They tend to be just a little, we don't hide that we're conservative Reformed Christians. We don't hide that. So a lot of their views on certain things had to do with them being less conservative. So maybe I didn't agree with it, but I truly believe that their aim was to have a time of reflection about, well, how should we be thinking about this as a church? Like, if we're listening to this, is it not just like, oh, did you hear on the last episode that such and such or whatever? Yeah. And most people that I've talked to who've watched the Mars Hill or listened to the Mars Hill podcast had more reflective things to say about it, as opposed to just being like, ooh, yeah, I knew Hillsong was bad from the beginning. It's like, oh no, well, like, do we know folks who display these kind of traits, or like, how do we evaluate talent in the church? Weirdly, there was a lot of overlap between caring more about the talents and less about character. Both.
The other thing that really struck me about both of them was the lack of apology from everyone. Oh, yeah. Like, if you listen carefully, you can hear, like, even there's this couple who were pastors in Ukraine. They were planning a church, and they were talking about they'd heard that there was impropriety on the part of Carl Lentz, and they were like, we have to report this. And I was like, that's good. That's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. But when they reported it, the way that they describe it is they went to the leadership and said, you have to deal with this because it's going to look bad for all of us. Yeah. And it's not about you have to deal with this because people are being hurt and he's going to hurt more people. Maybe that's the way they cut the interview. Maybe if you're going to give them benefit of the doubt. But it was a consistent thing. It was like, there's a statement from Brian Houston, and he says, I don't want to diminish what's happened to this person, and then he goes on to excuse the person who assaults the other person. And you're just kind of like, there's this lack of remorse. It's, I'm sorry you caught me, not I'm sorry that this happened. It won't happen again. Yeah. But that's a rabbit trail. Sorry.
That's okay. So, in summation, this is definitely a very interesting documentary. It has a lot to say that I do think the church should reflect on, even though it's not made in that manner. I think they should be reflecting on how they approach sung worship, which we will get to next week. Any final thoughts, Cara?
Yes. If you're going to watch it, the first episode is the one to watch. Yeah. The rest of it, just leave it.
Yeah, it's not necessary. Read the Wikipedia. What do you call it? Summary.
Yeah,
just if there's even a Wikipedia, the Cliff Notes version. Yeah. You don't need to watch it
I don't really recommend it. Mm-mm. I don't think it'll do you any good, really. But the first episode definitely is interesting. Yes. I didn't say it's going to.
You don't have to watch it. We just gave you basically.
We basically gave you all the parts that were worth thinking about, and some of them that weren't. But I don't really recommend it. If you're desperate to watch it, first episode only. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be it for us this week. We hope that you are a subscriber, but if you're not, what are you thinking? Get on hymnpartial.com and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Subscribers this week are going to hear our discussion that we're about to have on our favorite Hillsong song. Ooh. And all of you other people who haven't subscribed to us, you're just gonna have to wait. You're gonna have to wait an unknown amount of time to get access to that.
No DMing us until you've seen the bonus clip.
Yes, you have to watch the bonus clip before you can comment. But until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Bye.